It's been a long time, folks, but you've seen the title. Welcome back to the How Strong series. I've been wanting to make another entry in this series for quite a while, but with all the Gen 4 remake and Legends Arceus hype, I ended up putting it on the shelf for a bit. But now the time has finally come for its return, and who better to bring it back with than Garchomp? As is the case with this series, we'll look over all the games it can be used in, even if we have to trade it over at the beginning of a game because it's not available prior to the post-game. Garchomp is definitely one of the most iconic dragon types in the series. It's universally accepted as being powerful in every core game that it's been in. But how strong is it exactly? Well, let's find out, starting with Garchomp's first appearance being Diamond and Pearl. So in its first form, Gible isn't actually obtainable until a bit later in the game. Unfortunately, it'll also feel pretty underleveled next to the content you'll be doing soon after, being somewhere between level 15 to 17. It's not long after one of these is available that you'll be on your way to face Candace for your 7th badge. Yes, it takes that long to have access to Gible. The upside is it evolves to Gabite at only level 24, which has some nice stats for a middle form Pokemon. But this still isn't that great of an upside for your journey. And then there's the fact that Candace of all gym leaders is your next major battle point, an Ice-type gym. Being a Dragon ground type is just a disaster for that part of the game. It's almost as if the game didn't want to spoil you too hard over the fact that you could get such a potentially strong Pokemon, and therefore throwing a bunch of foils in the way for its exact typing on purpose. But the gym after is in Sunny Shore, where Volcaner resides. His gym specializes in electric types, which means your Gabite really gets to flex its ground typing quite nicely. And yes, I say Gabite, not Garchomp, because you probably aren't going to be hitting level 48 before that gym with that Pokemon. If you are crazy enough to handle that grind already, or stocked a bunch of rare candies, then you're going to steamroll most of this place. Either way, this is a good example of this Pokemon being really useful in your playthrough, even if you're a little underleveled. By the time you hit the Elite Four, you'll of course have Garchomp fully evolved. Surprisingly, I feel like there's not much to say about Garchomp's performance at this point in the game that isn't going to be obvious. If your Garchomp is doing well here and seeing a lot of use, it's probably because it's just an all-around strong Pokemon in general. It will probably have the easiest time against Bertha, whose rock Pokemon will have problems against Garchomp's ground-type stab attacks, like Earthquake. That same typing can help you against Champion Cynthia's Lucario due to its steel typing. But her Lucario also has Dragon Pulse, a pretty strong Dragon-type move that will of course be super effective against Garchomp. But since it isn't going to have a stab bonus, you may feel it's worth using Garchomp against Lucario anyway, depending on its level and your overall judgment of the situation. Otherwise, it's another situation where, for the most part, Garchomp is good against Cynthia because Garchomp simply has high and effective stat distribution and strong coverage rather than for an overly specific reason. Amusingly, if you want to take the discussion of how powerful Garchomp is from a reverse point of view in this game, I think Cynthia's Garchomp speaks for itself when you think about it. As far as the Diamond and Pearl remakes go, your experience with this Pokemon will be mostly the same overall, with only small differences due to general mechanical differences within the generation. The first one that always comes to mind for me is the existence of fairy types, which we'll talk about when we reach Generation 6. But even without getting into a lot of these mechanical differences, it's mostly going to be a similar experience for you when it comes to Garchomp. But going back to original Gen 4, if you're playing the Platinum version, you can get Gible a bit earlier than in the Diamond and Pearl versions. That means you'll be able to level it a little more organically than before, and have its ground stab attacks ready for the gym leader Byron and any other steel type oriented trainers that await it. There's not too many other big noteworthy differences as far as its effectiveness goes, at least in any specific unique ways. But overall, I actually still think this version favors the Garchomp experience more in your playthrough due to just being able to have it join you earlier in the game. Moving on to Heart Gold and Soul Silver, well, this is the first case of needing to bring in Gible from the get-go, since it isn't available normally. The first gym leader, Falconer, is so easy with or without a Gible that there's seriously nothing to say. I know Whitney and her Miltank are a bit of a meme, but if you're having problems against her, your strategies to try and cheese the battle probably aren't going to involve a straightforward attacker like Gible that's a bit shy of becoming Gabite. One of Gabite's first major battles, or it should be a standout, is Morty, due to all his Pokemon having poison as a secondary typing. But since they have Levitate, those super effective ground moves end up being useless. But Gabite still feels like a pretty strong Pokemon to have during this part of the game, especially since I feel like it's easy to be underleveled during this battle, so it will still have value. And 2/3 of Ucine's team in the battle near Cianwood City are pretty much doomed against your Gabite. At the end of the day, Gabite has 82 base speed and 90 base physical attack. It's really solid for this middle form Pokemon. Only later on in the early to mid 40 level area does that really feel like its dated overall base stats are catching up to it. But even by the time you reach Claire for your final battle, your Gabite will have learned Dragon Claw, giving you a strong option against 3 of Claire's Pokemon. Though Gabite will still be vulnerable to their own Dragon types, as all of her Dragon type Pokemon will have their own super effective stab attacks to counter with. If you look across the majority of battles throughout Johto and Kanto, you'll see pretty easily why the strengths of the Garchomp evolution line throughout both regions will shine a lot more than its weaknesses, because it's so solid overall. Just don't make it battle ice types, please. On top of that, the battle against Champion Lance's own onslaught of Dragon-type Pokemon will also eventually take down your Garchomp if you don't get some sort of perfect sweep due to so many of their own Dragon attacks. So, as powerful as it is, you still can't just throw Garchomp at everything constantly. Not to mention Earthquake is useless in a battle like that, as all of his Pokemon are Flying type. It's actually funny to think that the far stronger trainer Red might be more vulnerable than Lance if you have a Garchomp, as his Pikachu, his highest level Pokemon, is just barely going to do anything against the beast. Even with some of these battles exploiting his weaknesses later in Johto, it's still a pretty overwhelming strong Pokemon to have in your team throughout. For Gen 5, you can't get Gible in the original Black and White games, and you can only get one in Black 2 pretty much after you're finished with the game. Since it's not available at all in the first Black and White games, this creates another scenario where players have to trade Gible to themselves as early as possible in order to get the true experience of having Garchomp on their team. After going through the Gen 4 games, you should have a pretty good idea of when Garchomp is and isn't a strong choice for a battle. I will say though, in Gen 5, it feels like if you somehow overleveled even slightly with the Garchomp line, you're going to feel pretty overpowered. More than usual at least. Take the fight against Berg at the Castelia Gym. If you face him at level 24, your Gible will be a Gabite, and the overall stat increase and somewhat better move pool you'll have by then just feels secure. And I'm not even thinking about the ground type advantage it has over 2 of his Pokemon when I say that either. If you ignore that aspect of it, using Gabite still feels like a smooth experience overall. This isn't going to change much in later games either. Of course, there are still battles like the Ice Leader, Bryson. I think how Gabite fits in a battle like that speaks for itself. But for every battle like that, there are more where the Pokemon excels. If your Gabite is a higher level or has been evolved into Garchomp, then you're probably not even going to let the Opaloosa Gym phase you very much, as you'll be tearing through the team before they even have the chance to do much to retaliate. And for the most part, Garchomp doesn't have an overwhelming strength or weakness against the Elite Four of the game outside of some coverage options. And the game really wants you to take advantage of the legendary you catch in your big battle against N. Ghetsis' Bisharp is pretty vulnerable to ground stab, so the final fight may end up being a nice send-off on the investment of using Garchomp throughout your journey. Black and White 2 gives you very similar results overall in its playthrough, as when trading in Gible as early as you can. You'll be running into some of the same type-specific gyms as before, and it's a similar story. The Electric Gym being your playground, Ice Gym battles are scary, and Dragon Gym very all or nothing if you're actually committed to pulling out your Gabite. The Elite Four are a very similar story. but I think Iris makes for a fun, perhaps chaotic final battle if you're using Garchomp, just due to all the dragon types running around. Though her Lapras's Ice Beam will inevitably be a death sentence. Coming in the Gen 6, we finally have a situation where you don't actually need to do any sort of early trading to get Gible in our party at a pretty decent time. You don't get him too early, but not too late either. But in X and Y, this doesn't feel like it matters too much with how much easier it now feels to level your Pokemon. And on top of that, these wild Gible on Route 13 are at a pretty nice level, being 26 to 28. That means you won't have to wait long to start having a great Gabite time. A big thing in favor of Garchomp is the fact that, unless you've turned experience share off, you're definitely not going to be underleveled in this game most of the time. And if you're actually levels above the trainers you face, generally high attack brute force Pokemon like Garchomp tend to excel even more than usual during your adventure. I'd say this piece of context makes him the strongest he's ever been. But there's one thing that may stand in the way for you: the introduction of fairy types, which were designed to make the dragon typing feel more vulnerable, not even being able to take damage from dragon type attacks. This would feel worse for Garchomp if you were as underleveled as you would be in previous games. But since that's not the case, it's possible to power through since Garchomp isn't exactly fragile and can still use ground stab moves. And while this is technically a point away for Garchomp, you're going to have easy access to a Kanto starter along with your Kalos starter, and easy access to Lucario too. Yeah, Garchomp is probably going to be rolling with some pretty heavy hitters to help it out if there's any trouble. As far as specific battles, it's the same as usual for Garchomp. Another electric gym to dominate, another ice gym to hide behind a fighting or fire type. Laver City has its fairy type gym, which is also disadvantageous, but it barely feels like it matters because of how undertuned many of the trainer battles end up feeling. Even if you actually decide to use Garchomp in these situations, it's so powerful on its own that it'll probably overcome these few weaknesses in its game. Even the Elite Four kind of just fly by in this game, having less than 6 Pokemon, and one of them even being a Steel-type trainer to be eaten up by Earthquake. Champion Diantha has one strong Fairy type in Gardevoir, and that's kind of it. Basically, in your single-player journey, the new fairy typing somehow doesn't even feel like a big deal when it comes to whether or not you want to use Garchomp. It's just that strong. All that, and I didn't even mention that Garchomp has a Mega Evolution too. You can only get it late game at Victory Road. If you use it, then that's great, but I can barely bring myself to go on about it since not only is it so late, but it only makes so much of a difference at that point. Garchomp is going to destroy most of what stands in its path with or without it. In Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, Gible is only available post-game, so once again, you'll need to make an early trade to yourself. As usual, there aren't many interesting situations for Gible in the early game, unable to really take advantage of the first gym being Rock-type. It's also during this game that you'll realize from this point on, many of the points and situations discussed in previous generations are repeated from here on out. There are no major changes to the approach of Garchomp or its dragon typing going forward. I suppose if it wasn't broken, don't fix it, right? And none of the gyms are based on a typing that's a problem for Garchomp. It'll be little things like Tate and Liza's Lunatone and Solrock having Levitate. That will be annoying more than anything else. If anything, it's more the lack of being able to learn noteworthy stab moves on its own until it reaches the mid-30s level area that feels like an issue for general early gameplay throughout the entire series, but feels more rewarding after that. But hitting that level won't take long, since this new experience share is the standard. Team Magma and Aqua won't really pose a consistent problem for Garchomp either at any point, quite frankly. There are Ice and Dragon battles in the Elite Four with Glacia and Drake to spice things up a bit for you, but Champion Steven's formidable Metagross and Aggron are likely to be very outmatched by your fully prepared Garchomp. In both Generation 7 games, Gabite is available a bit late in the game in Haina Desert. it'll be in the 32 to 35 range, right around where its move pull starts to really kick in too, meaning it'll start being effective very quickly. Your first major encounters at Pony Island may be a little tough, however, as Komodo will definitely give Gabite problems if unprepared with its dragon attacks. But most players will have a strong enough party to accompany it to accommodate any further issues. And Hapu's Grand Trial battle will be a fairly standard experience for Garchomp at this point, though she's admittedly a little stronger in the Ultra versions. The Pokemon League, too, are mostly a standard endgame fare for Garchomp. In the Ultra versions, Garchomp gets to flex its ground stab attacks against Molayne Steel types. Kukui may be more of a problem for Garchomp than Ultra Sun and Moon Tao though, simply due to that Alolan Ninetales, an Ice and Fairy that is essentially antimatter for Dragon types, even with its mediocre attack stats. Still, I think Ultra Sun and Moon is a more difficult experience for Garchomp overall, though not due to anything unique, but simply because the game is generally more difficult than its predecessor. Finally, we have Gen 8. Where, quite frankly, the Garchomp experience in terms of effectiveness is more of the same, which is a very good thing. It's possible to get a Gible in Sword and Shield, but only with the expansion pass, so you'll need to trade it to yourself to have it for a traditional playthrough. A lot of the discourse surrounding its journey throughout the game is nothing you haven't heard before, however. Battles against other dragon types are still potentially chaotic, and its weakness to Ice and Fairy remain unchanged, making the gyms at Ball and Leia, Sir Chester, and Hammerlock the ones to be careful with when it comes to using Garchomp. Not to mention Bede in the Galar League. Even Champion Leon's Gigantamax Charizard doesn't pose the biggest threat to our dragon here, as it's resistant to its strongest attack, Fire Blast. Overall, I'd say Sword and Shield are both among the easier entries in this series, and it presents similar opportunities for it to dominate throughout the game. Most of the other battles in the game still aren't going to stand a chance against Garchomp outside of the occasional typing weakness, which is rather uncommon. Trainers in Sword and Shield also tend to have less optimized move pulls for their Pokemon than in previous games, which doesn't exactly help their chances against you no matter what you're using already, let alone this offensively focused pseudo-legendary that remains notorious even in the competitive scene. Lastly, we have the still rather new Legends Arceus. Gabite is available later in the game, as well as Alpha Gabite. It remains incredibly powerful in this game, so instead of pointing out some of the same points, I'd like to point out how its speed feels like it may be an even bigger deal in this game than I previously thought. Garchomp's base 102 speed can allow it to attack much slower Pokemon twice in Agile style. It's also one of those Pokemon that really feels totally worth your investment in the final battle against Volo's last Pokemon, Giratina. Since its dragon attacks will be super effective, Garchomp being the faster Pokemon can be incredibly clutch in landing a devastating attack right before it goes down, assuming Garchomp even ends up fainting in the first place during the fight. Just watch out for Volo's own Garchomp in the earlier part of the battle. Basically, by having one of these in your team, you're going to have a much easier time against what's become one of the hardest battles in this series than players that didn't. But even with that said, it's still not going to do you much good as it comes to you so late in the game, and you'll more than likely end up filling your team's slots with something else. So, how strong is Garchomp? Ridiculously strong. Unbelievably strong. And yet, the places you usually end up getting it let that strength go to waste more often than not, which is a real shame for this beast of a Pokemon. However, if you decide to trade it in, which seems to be the only other option compared to getting it late, then it's a real gem to use. But what do you think? Anything interesting about Garchomp you'd like to add? What Pokemon would you like to see discussed later on in the future? Let me know in the comment section below. Welcome back to the outro, folks, your favorite part of the video. Thank you for enjoying another Mystic Umbreon video. We made it through the end of the 8th generation, and now we begin the long trek into late 2022 where Pokemon Scarlet and Violet await us. It's a whole new world we'll live in, but we still gotta catch them all. However, there's still a ton of videos to do and experiences to have until then. If you're interested in more Mystic content, check out my TikTok and the Mystic Umbreon Shorts YouTube channel. If we get the 10k followers on TikTok, I'll be doing a viewer's choice video. If you like Genshin Impact, check out my Genshin channel Tevachinary. So if you all enjoyed, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more. See you next time.